Hello and welcome to another video on Stratty News TV. I'm happy to be joined by Jonathan and Ian. Lads, how are you since we last spoke?
Yeah, all good. A warm welcome from Fred and I in Manchester.
It's warm there in Manchester. It's raining here in Ireland.
Is it actually raining?
Raining now, yeah, it's misting down. Ian, you're not in the office today? Different surroundings?
No, doing part of my job from working from home. So, yeah, slightly different surroundings, but I can still see the sun and walk from outside in Manchester, as Jonathan's enjoying.
It looks like Jonathan has one of those fancy pens with Fred's tail.
I was about to say, what's going on there? It's either that or he's developed his own tail.
Anyway, lads, we're going to discuss this week United's whole handling of the coronavirus situation, how they've dealt with it, how players have taken the responsibility to stand up and be leaders on and off the pitch. The new kit leaks that I think a lot of social media are reacting to. They look like someone has mocked up something with a Microsoft Paint. And then, of course, we have more things as transfers to discuss, and the new podcast from United with Paul Scholes and Marcus Rashford, which turn up a funny scene or clip of some sorts, which is all over social media too. Firstly, though, Jonathan, the way United have handled the whole coronavirus pandemic has been admirable, really. Standing out when other clubs initially failed to do so.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, if we just judge United in isolation and not relative to other clubs, because obviously it can become an exercise in point scoring, can't it?
Yeah.
And I think that's where, obviously, the clubs maybe that haven't handled it as sensitively as United probably have fallen down even more, because it has been used as a point of reference and comparison. But if we just judge United in isolation, yeah, they've pretty much handled it as sensitively and as what's the word? Just as well as can be expected in the situation. Really, they've not shirked any responsibility. They've approached it with a lot of sensitivity towards the situation, and also towards the staff members and things. Maybe even more so than non-footballing businesses. And there's a lot of, as we know, football gets a lot of criticism on many levels from the press for the money that's involved in the game. But in this instance, it appears that all the staff members, the non-playing staff as well, who obviously aren't remunerated anywhere near the level of the players, have been treated well, as we'd all want them to be. So that, yeah, the club's been admirable, and it's just handled it. It's hard as well, because we have to think about sometimes as fans how we perceive the club, and a lot of we're very critical a lot of the time with how they handle fans and how they view fans as sort of more clients than fans. But I think in this instance, when it comes to the staff, they've been brilliant.
Yeah, and as well as that, there can be points going when what other clubs have done is referenced, but you briefly mentioned that football also comes under a lot of scrutiny in these times, as we've seen with footballers and some of Matt Hancock's comments on players should be donating more and that players should stand up, and the players were in the process of doing that. Matt Hancock made those comments, and kind of the irony behind that is the UK's government sheer incompetence at the moment in providing the supplies they need to provide to fight this pandemic. Ian, on what the clubs have done or what United have done in comparison to the incompetence of the government, a lot of irony on Hancock's at the moment.
Yeah, unfortunately, he's not come out of it as well as he probably thought in his own head, in terms of literally pretty much calling out footballers, which, ironically, we all understand that footballers are paid these sort of astronomical fees, but it only stems us so far down the league before they're not in that such. Bury was a club that's sort of near enough and just holding on to its own lifelines and such, but as it's a club quite close to where you live, Jonathan, and I know that you'd had, including friends of yours and player Daniel Nardiello, who's a good friend of ours on the channel, and I know that he will have not been paid astronomical fees during his career, even despite the fact that Bury at times, got themselves up for League One sort of status and such like. So you can understand that this sort of calling out of footballers doesn't really apply, and a lot of the clubs who are in that sort of situation lower down the leagues are going to find themselves in some real financial struggles to even sort of survive in this sort of situation. And I was actually listening to Kieran Maguire, who was on with Stephen Howson.
Is that Harry's brother?
No.
No, only say because I know
his surname's actually Maguire. I'll have a check and reference on that one. Get back to you, but he's basically talked football.
The only reason I said it is because his two brothers. Well, I certainly know one of them, but I'm pretty sure they play like lower league or non-league football. So I thought that's what you were. I thought that's where you were driving with it.
No, I was referencing to a guy who it might not be his name. I will go and have a nosy in a second. But he's on Stephen Howson's Warm Down podcast that was released at midday today. And it's quite a really good chat from him because it's all about the football finances and the sort of implications that we sort of briefly talked about as fans last week. But it gives you some sort of more context about where we could be going with that. But back to sort of United and the sort of irony is that, the health secretary, pretty much most of the government seems to be not handling certain elements of this crisis well at all, whereas clubs and United have actually pretty much led the way. And, we've all three and many of United's fan base have been vocal and disdaining of the club and the way that it's been ran from the top and of the likes of the Glazers and the Woodwards. And I think you've got to actually get to a point now where as much as we hold those views still, I think we could actually say, look, hands up, this has been dealt with in a superb manner. And I think that the things that have happened, I know behind the scenes that have been gradually coming out, for instance, like the ones with the changing of the lights on the stand at Old Trafford to support the NHS was sort of more recent sort of show of support. It really sort of touches of class that we sort of come to know from bygone eras of United that's not been seen for possibly, since Ferguson, in actual fact. And I think maybe we may be seeing some of the things that sort of we would have liked to have seen on those sort of, that may be having an influence from such people within the club, maybe the players. Harry Maguire's been, again, superb as captain. We've talked about his form, but off the pitch, he's held himself in quite a decent esteem. And I think maybe if that's come from him or it's come from Solskjaer, it's come from somebody even just in the communications team at United, then they're doing superb work. And I think that as fans, we'd actually, and we just sent out an email as must to all our members this afternoon that sort of puts on those points, but it includes a point in actual fact about how this shouldn't be the sort of end of these types of way that the club deals with it. It should be a way that we look at things as a club going forward. And I think the sort of communication between ourselves and a couple of other fan groups and the fans forum going forward will help, really help the club with that sort of situation, on to other sort of topics once we get back to football.
That's it, isn't it? They've kind of got to view it as not to be cynical and say it's all about PR and stuff, but certainly in terms of how the club relates to and is involved with its fans, it sort of has to view it as maybe a turning point in just sort of mending relationships with certain sections of the fans. And also, I mean, we touched upon it last week as well with the positive feeling that was starting to return to the club just before the virus hit. And it's almost as if the work they've done during this unfortunate situation is a continuation of that. Like, sort of, whilst they've not been able to build on the momentum on the pitch, certainly off the pitch, they've been able to continue to foster that positive relationship between the players and the fans and the club and the fans, which has in recent years certainly been strained, to say the least.
Is this also a change in strategy from the club from a PR point of view? We know about the appointment of Neil Ashton from the Sun, and we also know that there's a job going at the club at the moment for a head of social media, which they've branded as though they're looking for a fan. Is this another example that they're looking to bring in more of that influence, or is that just PR in itself saying they're looking for a fan, they're happy to take on someone with the experience?
Well, I mean, what was it, 100 grand a year? I'm currently in talks, if they can make it 100 grand a month, then I might get involved.
Didn't realise that
is
going to go back for manager type negotiations.
Is that what your accountant for Falcao's medical?
Yeah, well, no, I mean, to be fair, it does sound like a great wage to do what could, in theory, be a great job. But if we just take it on face value in terms of the job itself, like you mentioned, Dale, they've advertised it as it being for sort of a fan. Say, for example, let's just be hypothetical here. If any of us got the role, how would we approach it in terms of? It's difficult, isn't it? You're clearly going to be hamstrung in terms of a lot of what you can say or want to say, but it would, of course, be great in terms of what you would get in terms of access and how you could market the club on social media.
Well, I think the big aspect of this and the reason they're looking for a fan is to get that engagement, increase engagement with the fans. A lot of United fans you speak to at games may not feel that what the club is pushing out on social media. They might not see that in the same level. They might think what the club is doing is a little bit cringy in comparison to what the blogs are doing or the fanzines are doing, and they might be looking for that kind of middle ground. We don't know until they reveal more details of specifically what their plan is, and they may never reveal that. That might be between them and whoever gets the job. But yeah, it depends on what their plan is, and I think it is a good thing that they're looking for a fan to do it, because for years and years and years we've worked in we've done bits like independent club stuff on the club from a Straight News angle. And it's not always easy to get interviews with the best of players. We have to come at it with a bit of difference to what the official club do. But when hiring in someone that maybe is used to this, they might get that link. The link that they're missing from that. And I think it's important. Also, someone that knows fans, someone that knows the fan groups, that again can be that kind of port of call between the club and the fan groups. That's important. Like you see, for years we've criticised the way the clubs handle the media. It's been very hard. You went over to America, Johnny, and it was difficult for you, even though you made that trip over, to get the access that you would have wished for. Of course, you knew that before you went, but you went out on a limb. But what I'm saying is, if you look what Liverpool have done since Jurgen Klopp has come in, they've opened up their media so much that when people write about Liverpool, they're writing very, very positively. And that's not just because they're on the course to win the league. The club's reputation at the moment, since Klopp's went in, has been very, very good. Very, very good in comparison to it was for years. You look at Man United's website, it took them so long to update that. And years ago, when they released that back in 2005 or whenever they released it, it was a state-of-the-art website. No one had anything like it. And for years and years and years, Man City popping out with better looking websites, better social media channels, because let's not forget, it took United years to get on Twitter. And now they're seeing the importance of that.
Yeah, and YouTube. I mean, it's across the board, isn't it? It's not just, I mean, like you say, online, United have been last to the party on a few occasions, but like you say, finally, maybe they're now realising that it has to be invested in, because it has to be, like you alluded to there, a conduit between fans and the club. It has to be. And it's important nowadays. We're very cynical about it, but it's important.
right now it looks more important than ever. We spoke about this last week, and I remember correctly, you asked me about the social media feeds the clubs push out. Um, that's more important than ever now, and that's probably the reason why you asked me that, because you're focusing more on what the club are putting out. There's no games. We're hungry for content. We're hungry for snippets. The podcasts they're doing probably wouldn't be a top conversation on this show if there was games going on at the moment. We're all discussing it. We're diving into it. We're like a sponge, absolutely sucking it all in.
Yeah, no, 100%. And one thing you have to say with him as well, not only the podcast, they're doing a lot of the, similar to what we're doing now, aren't they? They're doing a lot of the kind of Google Hangout type videos with Sam and the other fellow, I can't remember his name. Is it Mark? I think he interviewed Bruno a couple of times this week. But they're getting great access to the players. In it, I think they also interviewed Igalo, didn't they, in the last week? So there's plenty of interesting videos, and it's a shame. The biggest shame is we don't get this during the season because, don't get me wrong, I know that the players have to focus on the football, and that's kind of a party line that will be trotted out. But why can't Bruno do half an hour once every couple of months from his bedroom or his kitchen? Or it's not going to distract from his football, is it? But what it does is it brings us closer to the players. We have an even better affinity with them. And this squad is now shaping up to be quite a likeable squad.
Yeah.
So things like that can only help, even if it's just 10 minutes once a month with a first team player, not straight after a game when they're just going to give you generic, it's a game with two half type answers. These are such simple ideas, and they're probably very easy to actually implement as well. But these are things that we need to do.
Yeah, maybe this whole pandemic and being in lockdown, and not just football clubs, but loads of companies are streaming and having like hangouts like this and for video content. Maybe this might give them the kind of thing that this works. People like this will continue. You'd hope so, and you'd hope that might be in the road for whoever takes over the head of social media, that they have a kind of they have the freedom to implement those plans more so.
That's the big thing, isn't it? You just hope that the massive juggernaut that is Manchester United doesn't kind of impede all the creativity that you would want to, that you'd want to showcase. But yeah, it's definitely would be a very interesting role. Did anyone watch, going back onto the podcast situation? Has anyone watched the Skull? Well, you kind of alluded to it before, but did anyone go back and watch the Pogba one? Because I actually, when we discussed it, it made me go back and listen. And I actually thought he did come across brilliantly well. And again, the cynic in you could say this is a PR exercise, and certain questions weren't asked, even with regards to his future. It was really only touched upon very briefly at the end. But it would have been nice if it was put on him a little bit. But in terms of Pogba, the person, as usually, he came across brilliantly.
I'm going to form a big defense of him, because throughout the week since that podcast came out, you've had lots of people in the Merseyside press come out and attack Pogba for
the Souness thing.
Yeah, over his comments. You had Robbie Fowler did a column for the Mirror. You had Richard Keys and Andy Gray talk about it from their lovely scenery in Dubai.
Criticizing Pogba because he said he didn't know who Souness was.
Oh, heavy, because it was so shocking that he defended himself. Now, the point that I'm making is every single one of them, when they're hitting out Pogba, make out that he's weak. They make out that he's not a tough footballer like Souness. So why do they all feel the need to back Souness and gang up on Pogba as a result? And it's what it's coming across as. And I was looking at all the headlines. It's bullying. Pogba, it's complete bullying. And there's no one there that I don't think has the balls at United to come out and support him. There may be tensions that he hasn't been around all season. I don't know. But I would like to see a United player come out and say, hold on a second. If you can all mount and defend Souness, who apparently doesn't need to defend, and apparently he was hard enough as it was, we're going to back our man.
I'm pretty sure that Solskjaer would. Because Solskjaer, even though he's very PR friendly, when a biting comment is required in a press conference, he does usually make it. He'll just occasionally remind you why he was such a top player, like what that little character trait in him is. And I reckon if it was put to Solskjaer, he'd 100% back Pogba on that. And it's ridiculous, like you say. I mean, we've been critical of Pogba for his sometimes what we perceive to be his attitude towards United and the club, and certain stretches of seasons where we feel like he's not performed or given his all. But when it comes to a flipping innocuous comment about an old footballer who actually he was pretty respectful towards, he said he heard he was a top player, but he didn't really know him. But
they glossed over that. They don't want to acknowledge that part of it. That doesn't fit the narrative.
It's like a load of people have done videos on it. They're just desperate for content. Like Sky jumped all over it, didn't they? Because it provided them with a day's worth of decent headlines that they could.
Yeah. To Souness's defence,
yeah,
I would say that Sky Sports have a lot of responsibility in this, because they knew when they were posing questions how to get Pogba out of them. So they're not free in this either. And it's just another thing. In part of Fowler's column, he points out that he recommends Pogba to watch a particular Liverpool match in which Souness performed strongly in. But he kind of does it in kind of an arrogant way that Pogba doesn't know much about football. And he says that in this particular game, Souness played remarkably in Roma's very own Olympic Stadium. Now, if Fowler did any research whatsoever, he'd know that stadium is not Roma's very own. They share it with Lazio.
Yeah.
It's almost unbelievable that you'd have to sort of pick a point between ex-players pretty much bickering across social media. This is the sort of influence that I've stopped listening to Souness purely on this basis, because he just seems to be just, and for me, and there's a couple of pundits that people will say, "Oh, I don't like him as a pundit. Don't think they're good." For whatever different reasons, but to actually be completely turned off by a pundit just for basis of the fact that they just seem to be wanting to bicker amongst and create this sort of thing. But like Dale said there, Sky Sports are not scot-free in it, and I quite think that Sky Sports are actually after that. Yeah. I think that's why they put him in there, because they want that sort of contract. And I've said this before when I've said about, for instance, Roy Keane having conversations where he does punditry and he says controversial things. And although you can agree or disagree with his opinion on them, I think that's why that sometimes he's allowed to be brought in, and they bring him in next to Souness for certain matches like the Liverpool United match, because they know that there's going to be more controversy schooled up for them to put headlines next to, and they can pick apart whatever everybody else says and take it out of context, which is what we all know is pretty much modern day journalism. But
they also know Keno's a big character.
The fact that we now live in a generation where there's so much content coming from different places. For instance, us here, independently, we're one of like several different outlets for Man United fans, but it works the same for all different types of clubs. And the fact that, and you're fighting for these sort of contact sort of areas and audiences and whatsoever. But the fact is, I think there's a lot of modern sort of football fans which is why we've got all these XG and stats and stuff that are being more propelled into your face when you listen to anybody talk about football nowadays, which really blows my mind. But I think you get this unfortunate sort of scenario where the people that are actually watching videos and stuff like this are quite capable of going out and doing research. Like Dale's just said, you can literally pick apart part of Robbie Fowler's apparent argument for the fact that he doesn't know who plays in a certain football stadium, and I think that's pretty much how modern football might go in the next few years. Is the fact that, and that's possibly where United are going with this sort of situation, is that they want to try and get themselves quite up to date in terms of giving themselves somebody who can do this sort of all-round sort of job where that they cover lots of bases and create lots of different creative content. That also means that, you know, we're including XG in videos all of a sudden and stuff like that. And I think you have to appeal to like different audiences as well with MUTV, and it'll be a very broad based sort of how you do it. But you've got to try and keep the sort of youth of today who are more into sort of esports, for instance, and stuff like that. And I think that will be, you know, as it ever grows and stuff like that, that'll bring in some. But go back to Souness, for me, he can say as much as he wants, but he just comes across as someone rather bitter who just seems to have this agenda. And I think at the end of the day, Pogba may be playing part of his role and keeping, you know, his comments about it like that. And there may be things that you could pick apart and say, oh, this was him disrespecting him. But at the end of the day, you're telling me that Paul Pogba, as a World Cup winning captain, doesn't know who some of the sort of the former sort of legends of the game is just doesn't seem to fit right with me.
Can I also
Even
add,
if it's a Liverpool legend.
he was asked to put his medals on the table as well.
It's just silly, isn't it? It's just silly.
Yeah, but wasn't it a lot of it? It wasn't Carragher stirring the pot as well.
Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, like it's a bit ridiculous with Sky, because I remember there was one incident where Pogba was playing, yet he was still focusing on Pogba, and I think even the presenter at one point had to interject and basically point out, well, yeah, but Pogba's not playing today, and I suppose that's where a lot of the memes originated from, being sort of involved in all things around the world, all the crises. But the thing with it is, yeah, Sky definitely, it's contradictory to, on the one hand, try and interject and tell Souness not to focus on Pogba when he's not playing. Yet when they get this opportunity for a little bit of juicy content to then stir the pot, it's really contradictory. So you're right, Dale. They definitely do have some role to play in it.
But that's our job on the blog. If you look at our coverage of the whole Pogba thing, it's been very much pointed out what's been happening in terms of what Sky are doing with the questions. Pogba's response, we defended him the other day. So as an independent Manchester United blog,
yeah,
that's where we come in and try and draw that line from the media and how United fans should perceive that news.
100%. And also, what if you actually think about it logically, what else could he have said that was more diplomatic than actually what he ended up saying? He could have said, well, yes, I am offended by his, you know, how he seems to be transfixed by me. But, you know, move on, really. If they don't want to know that, don't ask the question in the podcast. You could say again, I mean, why even mention Souness in the podcast? Just
I have a feeling that someone on Pogba's side of things might have requested a question like that.
Ah, right, okay. In which case,
I'm not saying I've heard that. I'm saying that I just have a feeling with the way PR works.
Yeah.
And when footballers want to send a message out, they know how to do that. And for instance, if Pogba didn't want to talk about his critics, they would have made that known before the podcast started.
Yeah, that's true. And also, I mean, Raiola wasn't mentioned, and also his future wasn't mentioned. So
how can you do a podcast with Pogba and not mention Raiola?
Yeah, exactly. That was the giveaway, I suppose, that maybe he did have an influence in the questioning. But yeah, the Pogba thing was just typical people desperate for content, wasn't it? And yeah, and it was amusing though to see people get fired up about it. And going back to just touching on the sort of media members as well, the ex-players, pundits. I think nowadays this whole job's for the boys, because there's a lot of nepotism in the selection of pundits, I think, for the main broadcasters. And I think the ex-players who have been the most successful, that's always the obvious route. But I think you've got certain pundits now who clearly distinguish themselves by doing more research and knowing more about what they're talking about, the subject matter. So it's not enough now to just say, well, yeah, I won a European Cup, so I'm qualified to give my opinion. I think people are now looking for pundits who actually have researched what they're talking about. So, like, for example, your typical the main example for me is Higginbottom.
Yeah.
Danny Higginbottom offers real insight into a lot of what you're watching nowadays, but because he hasn't won a European Cup or, he wasn't United for 5 years, he doesn't tend to get the bigger gigs. But I think more and more as we move forward, maybe there'll be more pundits like that who are able to elevate themselves just based on their knowledge.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like, Ian, your thoughts on the kits?
Yeah, we wanted to go on to this. I had to tweet one, which is actually quite a nice one earlier today. And obviously, we're getting round to which pretty much is sort of silly season as it is on Twitter with all these suggestions of what kits look like
Where
for the next season.
It's the lighting, but I'm actually wearing the green one now.
I was said to Dale before, in actual fact, lighting that I've got in which is my kid's bedroom in actual fact because of where I'm working from home. I've actually put on a light. It's just got Thomas the Tank Engine on the outside, just to make the background look more sort of normal. But if you turn it off,
you're still pretending that she's sunlight.
In the background, it looks like we've got a green wall. And I was saying this to Dale before we started earlier. It's actually the sun reflecting off the trees outside, and then back onto a white wall. So it's all sort of mental in that sort of scenarios of what we look like. So I could be wearing it. I am actually
ready for the new kit.
So back to the new kit sort of situation. Obviously, we've had these sort of leaked over several weeks as we normally do, and the three that have seemed to have appeared as the sort of standout ones that seem to be genuine is obviously the home kit that's the red with the yellow and sort of black and white little sort of almost as if it's been rained on, which I've actually got a tweet in actual fact in front of me. Which is actually comparing it to the seats on a coach in a sort of burgundy. It's quite funny in actual fact that it's come up in the tweet just as underneath the ones that I've got pictures of. But if you took that out, it just pretty much the same as the sort of white collar and the Adidas stripes, and it'd be quite similar to what we've had over the previous ones. So I think it's just lacked a bit of imagination from somebody whoever's supposed to be designing these. If it's going to come out that's what the kit looks like. The other two, we had a brief conversation before we started. That's the black and white one that looks like some sort of Italian 90 type kit that the referee might have
released with that. No zebras were harmed in the manufacturing of this kit.
It's either that or they've got to have names on the back that suggest that it's not the referee.
Exactly.
Just in case you're confused.
And the home one, I'd say, looks like the seat on a bus.
Yeah, it's yeah.
I do like the second one though. I like the green.
Green, yeah. We're playing with 11 David De Gea's next year.
It does look a bit Wolvesy though.
Yeah.
The green and gold one was a bit strange. It's a bit strange, the green and gold one, because I was thinking, well, would United actually release one knowing the colours, represent, the forms of what, fans used to wear for protest?
It's green and orange.
Would you class it as orange, though?
Definitely. There's no way it's that yellow.
It's supposed to be gold, isn't it? Colours were green and gold, not yellow.
Yeah, it does. They've also made the gold so subtle in the quantity of it, so that it couldn't. Yes, it could be labelled as green and gold, but it's not stripes, is it? It's not half 50-50.
Yeah,
they probably avoided that for that very reason. But maybe still a subtle nod to that. It could be. I've not thought about that. It's nice though. You're right. If I was going to get one of the three, it probably would be that one. But what did you boys think of the old classic that people love now? This one, the early 90s away.
Before my time, so I'll let that one to Ian.
What would
Sportsman Cog. It's infamous with sort of the early days of Ryan Giggs.
in gigs?
yeah,
For me, in my mind, in the kits that he wore when he was breaking through from the youth team.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's strange. Me and Dale was having a conversation before the competition is on Stretty News' Twitter feed for a couple of classic mugs that are coming out in kit colours. You want to get yourself involved in that. Dale won't mind me plugging that, but at the same time,
yeah.
but
he's going to. But what's my call? Yeah, we actually picked this up in actual fact from last week that you're. We was having a conversation earlier about your mug that you were. Well, I don't think it was that one last week, was it?
It was
Oh,
the grey one last week with Scalzi. That's
Yeah.
why you couldn't see it, Ian. It was so subtle because it was grey. You see.
it was a curse of a cup.
Yeah, exactly. But no, but the reason I ask about this one is, what would we have? I was thinking about this yesterday. I mean, we love it now, and it's pretty funky. But like, if that came out today, would everyone be like, "What the f- is that?" Do you know what I mean? Like, it's amazing. I'm thinking in 30 years' time, will we be looking back at that black kit, and we've got mugs with the black kit design on it. There's the one that we're talking about now. I often think
They're actually quite similar in actual fact. Just looking at
not
what you just showed me and what it's on the computer
What
screen.
did you think of that kit when it was released? Like back, say when you were kids in the release of a new kit, what was the reaction usually? Were people usually reacting the way they are now, or was it more kind of delighted to see a new kit released?
there was more. In a way, it was even more special. Well,
Mm.
maybe I'm speaking from an older person's perspective, but I just remember, like, obviously social media wasn't around, and you'd just get a picture in the paper, or you'd see someone with a player, or there'd be a leak in the paper, and it was always really exciting. But then I might just be talking from a younger person's perspective. But I just think, like, with this one, I don't know. Like I was saying, are we just being cynical because we're always talking about, oh, I wish we had more kits like the late 80s and early 90s. And I suppose to the untrained eye, they might look at the black one and say, well, you've got one now that's a bit similar. And we're all moaning about how we don't like it. So I don't know. But they never seemed to miss in the 90s. I know there was the grey kit. But apart from, like, all the kits used to be amazing. And I just wonder, like, why do they not generally prove popular nowadays compared to the past?
I'd like this one on you, Johnny.
Yeah. Is it a tiger?
The Bumblebee, what it looks like.
Is it is that the fourth kit this year?
No,
that was one other one that was released for FIFA only.
yeah, EA Sports.
They did it. Didn't they do? I can't remember if they actually did.
Didn't
Didn't they do one the year after that was sort of similar to that, but you could actually buy a limited number of them direct from the mega store?
This one's still for sale for 45 euros.
Is it an official one on the United
Yeah.
web? Ooh.
That was the one that was the one the year after that was actually the sort of like the exclusive one that went onto FIFA.
Right. Can you buy that like from the official website?
You can actually buy that off United.
Yeah, Adidas have it there now.
What about the tiger one? Can you buy the tiger off an official website?
It's not a tiger, it's a bumblebee.
Oh, is it a bumblebee?
Yeah.
Oh, right.
Quite in touching. Back onto the net, yeah. Can you actually buy it though? I always thought it was just a concept kit that was played in FIFA that you could download to play in FIFA. I didn't think it was an actual kit. And then when they got the buzz off that one the year after, they released the sort of Snake one.
$19.
No, right.
Is it an official?
Nah, that's not. That looks like that was taken from one of Cat Slater's nightgowns.
Right.
Back
Okay.
the subject of that 92 sort of 91 kit that you had on your mug there, Jonathan.
It's comic.
As somebody, yeah, it's very, very retro now. And as somebody who wore that kit as a little child, but would have never sort of known the sort of influence it would have made on a match-going fan back then. Which, if you think about the sort of the 20-year-olds that would have wandered around on the terraces of Old Trafford in the late 80s, when Adidas and Admiral were the kit suppliers back then, before it turned into In actual fact, that was an Adidas kit when it was sort of the end of Adidas before it went to Umbro. And I would have thought, in actual fact, with the sort of design at the time that goes through that design, that it would have actually been quite popular with a lot of Adidas sort of United fans and the sort of the types of fans that would have travelled around Europe and bought those and would have been parts of the firms and the hooligans and that type of things that brought these types of different designs back from Europe when they went to Euroways. And I think that probably was where Adidas sort of got some sort of inspiration for in the fact, and they've used that similar sort of design in the Germany kits, if you recall the sort of, and they've become retro again in the same sort of style. And I think one of the United Adidas originals, and me and Dale was talking about this before as well. We've spoken a hell of a lot before this, Dale. But yeah, we spoke before about retro kits and the fact that Adidas, when they took over the shirt sponsorship, was it 4 years ago now? They actually took the license off a company called Scoredraw, who was the only licensed reproducer of shirts. And I've never really understood it, but Adidas did that so they could do their own originals range. But none of the Scoredraw, who still exist and still produce their replica kits from other clubs, they only really covered the sort of Umbro sort of eras. And before that, Admiral. So they never really did any Adidas ones. So I never really got the connection of why Adidas took that license from them or got United to take the license from them. But yeah, I think that was actually that sort of white, and then it sort of bounces off like an M, and it went right. It was actually a design that was on an Adidas Originals jumper, if I remember rightly. That would have came out a couple of years back.
Yeah. Haven't Stone Island bought a club in the lower tiers of Italian football, and they're planning on releasing kits with the Stone Island logo on it?
I don't know.
Yeah, it happened this year. I think they're planning it's a massive move because lots of people want to buy those kits.
Yeah, it's clever. There's lots of really interesting collaborations with like fashion brands and football.
PSG and the Jordan trademark as well. That's huge.
Yeah. It's there's interest. They are interesting. People are realising obviously it's big business now. Like the Hoi Polloi, what do they do? They've started bringing out some retro stuff. I can't remember. There's a few brands that do really cool stuff. Copper. They do good stuff as well with the apparel, and yeah, there's some really clever stuff. But my prediction is that in 2050, people will be doing whatever the 2050 equivalent is of a podcast, and they'll be showcasing the mugs with the black and white design on it.
What would this podcast look like then?
Well, that's it. We'll all be 3D, won't we? We'll all be like doing virtual high fives and whatever. Drinking whatever the equivalent of a latte is in 2050. Yeah.
Right then. 3D avatars of us all.
And I think as well, before we wrap
up the screen, literally just standing in your front room.
Before we wrap it up,
I could come in your front door and had a conversation with you there face to face.
Yeah.
Something we touched on last week was the Harry Kane transfer. And I think that this week in the media it's been totally kind of debunked. Sky Sports kind of saying that United are not interested in paying that money right now. It's only makes sense because right now they're prioritising other players if they can get those ones done. And Harry Kane kind of seems like a bit of a massive risk, a bit of a luxury sign to paying that money and a player that's injured a lot of the time. So thankfully that's dead in the water. One player popped up today is Joe Felix from Atletico Madrid. Now he cost 113 million last summer, which is a lot of money. He may have struggled in his first season in Spain, but surely clubs, when they spend that money on a young player, they're not going to cash in and just give him over to Manchester United now. That makes no sense.
Stick or twist, isn't it, with him? Because he's only had one season where, I mean, do you remember the game, obviously the recent game in Liverpool? I remember watching him there and thinking, how much did they pay for this lad? But obviously he was impressive in Portugal when he burst onto the scene. But so young, he probably hasn't done that much damage to his reputation, because they can always argue, yeah, but if he stayed another 1 or 2 years, got used to the pace of the league, etc. So they could probably still get 3/4 of what they paid for him, if indeed they believe that he's not going to actually materialise as an elite player.
But surely, if they're willing to let him go, is that not a sign to Manchester United to stay away?
Oh, absolutely, yeah, absolutely. But they might just say, well, he doesn't suit the Spanish game, or he's not, I don't know. But you've got to think that if a Portuguese lad, certainly culturally, Spain is nearer to Portugal, and you'd probably say that the football is going to be nearer to Portuguese football than English football is to Portugal. So you've got to say that if he's not adapting there, why would he adapt any better in England? So yeah, you're right. It would be, there's certain red flags there for sure.
You see, there you go again. When news comes out, our job is to kind of to look at it from a perspective that, is this genuine news? Is this worth keeping track of? I think those Felix rumors are exactly the same as the De Ligt stories that were fed a few weeks ago, that Juventus could be cashing on him. Again, another young player, loads of ability, spent loads of money on him. I can't see 1 year that these clubs cashing on young talent like that. These investments, when they made them, De Ligt and Felix, those two players, they're long-term investments.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, it's an obvious narrative, isn't it? Like we keep sort of harking back to this point of people are desperate for content, and the idea that young talented players who haven't quite hit the ground running might move on to another club is one of the age-old obvious narratives, isn't it? So they can always peddle that at the moment, can't they? As something to write, when there's probably maybe no basis to it at all. Interestingly, talking about podcasts, and we've kind of, one of the things we've been doing the last couple of weeks is trying to give people ideas for what they can listen to or read or watch or whatever during the lockdown period. There's a podcast called Quickly Kevin. I don't know if you've heard of it. Very funny comedians in England that basically just talk about the 90s football, and they generally have like a 90s player on. It's brilliant, honestly, trust me. In terms of football, it's one of my favourites. But they were reviewing yesterday. They do these review shows as well, where they'll watch like an old football film or an old football documentary and just go to town on it. Like, obviously, kind of ridicule it, but from a very funny perspective. And they were looking at, I hadn't even seen this. It's a 45-minute documentary on YouTube in 3 parts about behind the scenes at United in '89. You go and watch it straight away, because there's some brilliant stuff in there, but they absolutely tear it apart in a funny way. One of the interesting scenes is Fergie in a boardroom, and there's some really interesting behind the scenes stuff. And obviously, it's before Fergie kind of really came to the fore as one of the world's best managers. But he's talking about one of the players that they were interested in that summer, and he's saying, yeah, but they're probably, they might just be creating interest with other clubs and stuff like that. But it's a really interesting, because it's such an innocent piece when you look at football now and how PR and commercial it is. But this is a really kind of stripped back, almost, it's just raw. But I really recommend you go and watch it, because some really funny insights in there, and there's a lot of innocence in it, which is kind of nice. So I'd recommend watching that during this lockdown period, and then after you've watched it, listen to the podcast, because there's some funny musings on there.
No, podcasts are how I'm passing a lot of my time in lockdown. Things from Blind Boy to Joe Rogan, and then some of my favorite football ones. Without podcasts, I probably only kind of started listening to podcasts regularly probably 3 years ago, but now I almost have like a schedule in which I know what days certain podcasts are going out. I listen to going to bed. I find it an easy way to kind of shut down, rather than my old habit of going to bed and being on my phone and scrolling through Twitter or whatever. I find that's why I was struggling to actually sleep the time, and podcasts are a way to wind down, not unless you're listening to loud music or something crazy. But yeah, I think that's it for this week's show. Ian, Johnny, how can people follow you on social media? Ian first.
You can find me at Ian Patterson MU Although I'm just going to chip in with the fact I was correct with Kieran Maguire before, the guy that I was talking about that was on Howson's show.
Is he Harry Maguire brother?
I'd probably not entirely. No, I don't think so. I think, like Jonathan alluded to, his younger brothers are actually in the thingy. I don't think he's got any. He's a university lecturer on football finance. And if you actually get a chance of talking of these podcasts, and I know many people will be quite advocate of us going and sharing these podcasts, I would actually go and listen to that one, even if you're not a sort of fan of what of what Stephen puts out, which you can be hit and miss with sometimes with Stephen, and I know that others will be the similar sort of saying. But yeah, he's that one was quite good because of the way that it explained the sort of the finances that go along with what United can do and can't do in the transfer market, which is just going back onto that situation with Harry Maguire and why United are actually and possibly even might influence like Joel Felix in that instance is the fact that United may have a bit of being able to push on certain clubs because of the finances that are going to be restrained to buy players, possibly he was suggesting at cheaper prices than what they would normally have done. And so, yeah, for instance, we've suggested before about Rashford being valued at 150 million and that wouldn't have budged, where he wouldn't realistically would budge, where sometimes a club like Joel Felix's club may struggle. So we may see some sort of interesting sort of moves in the transfer market from United, maybe based on the finances of other clubs and where they could potentially get an advantage. And he was suggesting that United would actually maybe be where they was pushed. His example was Leicester and Harry Maguire last season, going back to his namesake, was actually the fact that Leicester came back and said, no, we want this price, we want this price, we want this price 3 or 4 times. United ended up with that value being as high as it was, and the way that the deal was structured was different to what United were after. Whereas, for instance, this might not be the case this coming transfer window. United might have a bit more flexibility over other clubs, and that might be the case where we see City and other clubs like Chelsea do more business, especially Chelsea after their transfer ban.
The thing is, before the before the coronavirus and whatever financial implications that might have on football generally, it's always about what position a club is in financially, particularly in terms of how the selling club. So, for example, even with Bruno Fernandes, that all boiled down to the fact that United were aware that Sporting were in a position where they need the money. And so that's why United did haggle and hold out, because they knew in the end that they wouldn't have to pay a sort of an extortionate price. But like you're saying now, after the virus, I mean, you would have to assume that clubs are going to be even financially, they're going to be, there's going to be difficulties there. So maybe now more than ever, there's going to be, like you say, in transfers with players that ordinarily might have gone for more money. But it's always about what financial position the selling club is in anyway. This might just unfortunately exacerbate that for quite a few clubs, which is a shame. And just touching on the financial aspect as well, just before we go, another podcast as well that's worth listening to. Chapman, that's his name. Is it Chapman? I'll sort of mention it to you boys before. Ornstein, the guy who does a lot of Arsenal news, I think, on Twitter. He has a podcast on The Athletic. I think it's with a fella called Chapman. Anyway, it's the two of them on The Athletic, and it's free at the moment, the podcast. And they do a whole hour with a couple of other journalists on lower league football and the kind of implications it will have for them. And that was a really interesting listen, because I know we all kind of moan about United and stuff, but they're talking about the actual survival of the clubs, not just about, can we go and sign a star player? So, these are real issues that are affecting football clubs around the country and world. So that's actually, I found that a really interesting and, enlightening piece in some ways. And they're doing a second part to it this week. So I'd recommend that as well.
Where else can we find your stuff on social media, Johnny?
Oh, just my name, Jonathan traditional spelling, and then Schrager, Shager. Yeah, give us a follow. I'm not that active nowadays. My dog takes up all my attention, but occasionally I tweet something half amusing.
Is that the same one for Tinder and Bumble?
We're never going to do a podcast without Tinder getting in the middle of it.
We managed to go. How long have we gone here without that? We've
55 minutes.
We've done 55 minutes and not a single mention of the dating app. I don't know how. Yeah, you couldn't resist, Ian.
I think it's mainly because we know that you're the single one between the three of us, and obviously with lockdown and you taking precautions, as you mentioned last week. I think we'd probably not push it as early into the podcast as we would have done previously. You wait till lockdown's over, and we'll be pushing out the podcast from like minute 1.
Right. I might have more to talk about.
You can follow Stretty News on Twitter at Stretty News, the blog strettynews.com. We're also on Patreon to support the blog. Check us out on there, /Stretty News. And other than that, we'll see you again next week. And thanks to the guys for joining me.